Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hey, business leaders, want your audience more focused than a monk in a staring contest? Want them grinning bigger than when they found out their in-laws aren't coming for Christmas? Then you need the amazing Arthur Fratelli. Arthur is a TEDx speaker, Last Comic Standing alum, and lifelong martial artist, traveling the country, captivating audiences at conferences, corporate events, and schools. His high-energy keynotes blend failure, focus, and flow with comedy, magic, and jaw-dropping skill. Facts fade, but stories stick, and Arthur delivers a TEDx-worthy experience they'll never forget. Book now at theamazingarthur.com because your event deserves more energy than a caffeine-fueled ninja. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts. My guest today has an incredible martial arts journey that spans continents and disciplines. After excelling in competitive sports when he was younger, including ice hockey at both the USHL and NCAA levels, he ventured into martial arts until he discovered his true path of Aikido. His dedication led him to Japan, where he trained under the legendary Morihiro Saito Shihan, earning the prestigious Menkyo Kaiden, the highest license in Aikiken and Aikido. As a 7th degree black belt and sought-after instructor, he's impacted students worldwide from elite athletes to military personnel. He's currently the head instructor and founder of the Minnesota Aiki Shuren Dojo. Please welcome to the show today, my guest, Mr. Mark Larson. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing great, Brian. Honored to be here. Thanks for having me, and I'm still curious who suggested me. So thank you to that person if you're listening to this.
Yeah, I'm trying. Like I said, I'm getting better now at actually when people suggest someone putting their name next to it, so I remember because I never used to do that.
Well, it was interesting you said it wasn't anybody in Aikido, so I'm honored.
Yeah, I'm almost positive it wasn't. I'm 99% sure it wasn't another Aikido person, but I'd have to go back and re-listen to a bunch of episodes and try to figure it out probably, and I don't have time to do that. So
no, understood.
But I'm sure once they hear it, they'll be like, oh yeah, that was me. I'm glad. It's usually what happens. They'll reach out and tell me it was me. So it'll be
cool.
Good.
Well, I thank that person, yeah.
No, but definitely what we like to do with all my guests, I want to go back. I mentioned you've been doing it for a while, but I want to know what led to that, where that first interest in martial arts came from, that first spark that kicked off your martial arts journey.
Yes, absolutely. And before I mention the name Bruce Lee, of course, I'm going to mention my mom.
Okay.
You know, at the end of the Vietnam War, they had that large scale of migration from Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian, and Hmong people to the USA, and a number of them settled in the St. Cloud area, St. Cloud, Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And this was a time, this was about 1975, and I was only 4 years old. This was before I even started school, and my mom was asked to teach ESL at a time where she had to ask, what is it, And she also worked closely with the Ecumenical Refugee Relocations Program. And so I really grew up around Southeast Asian people. And, we were always, they were invited into our homes. We were invited into theirs. We'd go to their festivals and gatherings and things like that. And the kids were always doing some sort of martial art. Okay. And so I became a fan of that and would play around with them. And in fact, in elementary school, I bought my first pair of nunchakus from one of my mom's students. Everybody who's done that has hit the back of their head a few times. Oh, yeah. And then, of course, Bruce Lee, I bought his poster, would watch his movies, things like that. So that was my start. And then, of course, the summer of 1984, I'm in 7th grade and the Karate Kid comes out. Yes. And, I always had this respect and admiration and fascination for Asia. And there was just something about Japan that was so unique. just the very kind of the wabi-sabi, that beauty and simplicity, very earthy, the tones, the moss and the woods and the things like that just kind of drew me in. Watching the Karate Kid, I wanted to do a martial art, and I was so involved in like every athletic under the sun until about middle school. Then you had to kind of choose your seasons. You had to choose your fall sport, your winter sport, your spring sport, and whatnot. But after watching the Karate Kid, I was telling my mom and dad how I want to do martial arts. And my mother, teaching ESL students, one of her students' grandfathers was a Wing Chun instructor.
Okay.
And yeah, so I'm in 7th grade, and I don't know if you're familiar with the St. Cloud area. But
I grew up in Little Falls, actually. So.
Okay, yeah. So 8th Street, Veterans Drive, you go down in front of the Municipal Sports Center. Now it's called the Mac Arena and whatnot. There's a Coburn's there, a smaller Coburn's, or there used to be. I've been out of St. Cloud for quite some time. On the right-hand side and right across from there are these duplexes. And this gentleman would teach out of there to me once a week. And he spoke no English, and he would show me these books. And there's pictures of Bruce Lee, and he would always say, brother, little brother, And so it's kind of interesting because I'm thinking, he's meaning we do the same art and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And even recently I've been trying to do some research because the gentleman was just kind of in transit, came over for a while. And I mean, it was probably about a year or so. And then he moved to, I believe, Chinatown in San Francisco. Okay. And I've reached out to other people to just get his name again and all this, and everybody. I don't want to say a name and be wrong, but you have to understand this gentleman at this time, this is 1984, and he's in his 60s for sure. I mean, he's the grandfather of one of my students, my mother's students. Mm-hmm. And people don't realize, Bruce Lee was born in 1940. He would still, if he was alive, he'd be turning 85 this year. It seems like, he's been gone so long that, so obviously this gentleman was maybe 20 years older than Bruce Lee at the time, Mm-hmm. So it could have been like a kohai, in the Japanese language we say. But anyway, so I was studying with him, and then he left. And then one of my best friends in high school was doing taekwondo, and we would just kind of mix and match and train on our own and whatnot through high school. Really no more formal instruction, just training with people who were training in martial arts and whatnot. Yeah. And then after high school, I graduated in 1989 from St. Cloud Apollo. I went on to play in the United States Hockey League. And I played for the North Iowa Huskies, who are stationed out of Mason City, Iowa. And now, over time, they became the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders, and they moved and whatnot. But when I was there, Sonny Ono was teaching Goju-ryu karate in Mason City.
Okay.
Do you remember Sonny Ono?
I remember the name. I don't think I ever met him, but I remember the name.
Okay. Yeah. And in the mid-90s, I mean, I was over in Japan at the time, but he was a manager in the World Wrestling Federation. Or I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of them. But it was really interesting because I'm there playing ice hockey full time. So you really don't have a lot of time to be practicing martial arts. We're skating every day for hours on end. We're traveling weekends, long bus rides, all over North America. And, but I was kind of like his gopher. I would deliver water softeners out to his home, or I'd wash some cars, or I'd clean the health club and gymnasium, his dojo area, because that's where the hockey players, we'd work out and do our aerobics and things like that and lift weights and things. And so he'd pull me aside, and he knew I had a love for martial arts, and he would just kind of teach me some street stuff on the side, because I'd be having games or practices when his regular practices were going on, but he would teach me. So I was able to, keep that going all throughout, just have bits and pieces. And I always told myself, when I'm done with my athletics, I'm going to train in a martial art from square zero or ground zero, Okay. And so after a year in the United States Hockey League, I ended up at Bemidji State University. And our first year as hockey players, we have to stay in the dorms, just to get used to the schooling and the system and, parking and getting fed and all these things. It's just your freshman year, you're required to. Yeah. And then my sophomore year, when all the players are moving out and getting apartments and houses and things like that, I decided to stay on campus. And so I moved to an international floor, and my roommate was this Lau Yuk Lung from Hong Kong, who at the time was 26 years old, and he'd been training in Wing Chun Kung Fu for 20 years.
Nice.
And now he's going to be my roommate.
That's
and
cool.
So he kind of reinvigorated that passion for Wing Chun again. And I was doing a little bit of Goju-ryu, after I left Mason City. Again, no real formal instruction at that time. And then I saw the movie Above the Law, of course, and I'm like, what is that? And here on that international floor, living across a kitty corner from us was a Hong Kong police officer who did some Aikido.
Okay.
And the reason why he reached out to me was I had a Steven Seagal movie poster on my door. I think it might have been Hard to Kill. I don't think it was Above the Law, but it might have been Hard to Kill or something like that on my door. And he's like, "Oh, Aikido." And he's like, "Yeah, I know." And so I'm like, "Well, I tell you what, I can help you, edit some of your English paper and whatnot if you teach me some, a little bit of techniques." And he just teach me a few techniques here and there, Kota Geis and whatnot. But again, I'm going to school full time, playing ice hockey.
Yeah.
So you just don't have the time to dedicate it to that. So I told myself, again, when I'm done playing, I'm going to start from square one in something. And, I was fortunate to play for 3 years out of high school, and started as a young child in competitive sports and whatnot. Everybody has a time when they know it's time to move on and whatnot. And the thing that sticks with me is a former professional athlete that I knew said, once you're not enjoying it anymore at that level, it's time to move on.
Yep.
You might even remember the name Kurt Knopf out of East Grand Forks. He played for the Minnesota Vikings and Houston Oilers, and he was a star athlete in East Grand Forks. You're up in that area, aren't you?
Yeah, I am now. Yeah, I'm in.
Yeah,
I'm in Moorhead. What's funny is that the two sports that I'm not really a fan of are football and hockey. So
not a fan of, and you're a martial artist.
I know.
Those are martial arts right there.
Although I did watch my Moorhead Spuds win their first ever state championship last week, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, great team. Yeah, and even the Class A,
East Grand Forks. Yeah,
they beat St. Cloud. So up in your area, you had two champions there.
Yep. Both.
So anyway, yes, yeah, congratulations. And so I was, going to practice. I mean, you got like 26 guys on a team, 20 kids play, whatnot. You're in and out of the line, especially when you're young. I mean, out of high school, 89, I actually was enrolled at UND, and then the assistant coach that brought me there left, so I had to go. And he was going to coach a high school team, so I can't go backwards. So I was actually heavily recruited to St. Cloud State, but you grow up there and you kind of want to go away from college. And
definitely.
I just, I was 17 years old when I graduated from high school, and you don't know anything, you know what I mean? And you're like thinking, well, I'm going to choose where I'm going to play. Yeah, right. It doesn't work that way. Right. I've been able to help a lot of hockey players since, because I didn't know that path. And even the USHL at that time was, not as popular. It was a tough road, and it was a good one. But now, I mean, it's very rare for kids out of high school to go and play college hockey. You need that experience. You just get bigger, stronger, faster, more games, experience. I mean, here, like I said, I was briefly at UND, and then I went to the United States Hockey League, and then I had a shoulder injury, so they wanted me to go back again at the places that were talking to me. And I was always a good student. I was actually even heavily recruited to West Point Academy. But you want to have that lifestyle, right? I mean, it's not something you just think, oh, I'll just do it, And at age 16, when you're making that decision, you think 8 years of your life is 4 years of college and 4 years of serving, and you think it's half your life. And if you have, significant others in your life, you think, 2 weeks away a year, it's impossible and whatnot. I mean, I remember my first trip back from Japan, and I opened the file cabinet at my parents, and I grabbed the letter and I set it on the table. I said, why didn't you make me do this? And they're like, well, you got to want to do that. But I think I found it in martial arts, that discipline and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so coming to Bemidji, and this was a time when St. Cloud State was going Division I, Mankato State, and Bemidji there, that was one of the recruiting things that they saying, hopefully in these years you're there, we're going to be D1 and whatnot, and D2 at the time. And the caliber of hockey was outstanding. And we played some very high level teams and things like that. And you're in and out and this and that. And, our coach was old school, and he kind of prepared me for my journey in Japan, and I kept in touch with him up until he passed, legendary coach Bob Peters. But anyway, I stopped enjoying going to practice. I played out my sophomore year, and that's really what he builds you for, and the veterans, you got to pay your dues, you got to go through this and this challenges and things like that. And he even said, this is what we're building you for. You're going to, we're going to win a national championship. And they did, and he was right.
Wow.
But, and hopefully I can bring up the story later about that 4 years. You got 4 years of high school, 4 years of college eligibility. And it took me 4 years really to get in with Morihiro Saito, but I'll come back to that. But at the end of my sophomore year, I said, Coach, I had a meeting with him. I said, I'm not going to be here. My position's open, everything. And he's like, this is what we're building you for. And he said, well, you go to Japan, do your thing, and then come back, because he knew I was still young. I mean, like I said, I came in, I was still probably like the second youngest guy on the team. We had 21-year-old freshmen. We had a 25-year-old captain. We had another gentleman who was married on the team. I mean, these are men,
Yeah.
And you're 18, 19 years old, those 3-4 years make a lot of difference in the weight room and life experiences and things like that. You have to be an anomaly to play at that level right out of high school. But all great people, great players, and obviously Coach knew with all his success. And each time I'd come back, he'd have me come up and visit him, and he asked me twice, if I'm going to come back to the team. First year, I'm like, no, Coach. All right, we'll go back one more year and then come back. Second year, he asked me. I said, no, Coach, I'm going back to Japan again. He didn't ask me again. I think it's the baseball rule, 3 strikes and you're out. So anyway, my Wing Chun teacher here at Bemidji State, Gary Lao Yaklang, he knew that, he was teaching me like the gentleman earlier when I was in 7th grade, going back to the foundation basics with Seolim Tao and some sticky hands and just things like that nature. And also at that time, that 1 year he was training me from 91 to 92, I was training with a gentleman by the name of Corey Bellino, who went on to fight professionally out of Corpus Christi, Texas. And I know he coaches athletes and things like that, big into wrestling as well. Might be a guy you'd like to talk to sometime.
Nice.
But so I was training with him, and this Gary, I'm just going to say Gary, it's just a little bit easier for me, but he knew my heart was kind of into Aikido because they had this Minnesota State University sister campus in northern Japan. It's a part of the Bemidji State, St. Cloud State, Winona State, Metro State, Mankato State. I'm probably missing some Southwest State or whatnot. But anyway,
Moorhead
they had
too,
yep. Moorhead, of course. Yep. Sorry about that. And so you could be paying tuition in Minnesota and going to school in Japan, and then you're getting your generals, you're finishing your education. Now, you couldn't get a 4-year degree there, but you could get your generals done, and it was kind of like a bridge where Japanese students would go there and learn the English language and then come over here and major at one of the Minnesota State schools. And we would go over there for the cultural experience. So I studied Japanese language and the culture and history and those kinds of things. But I went over there for martial arts, for a particular Aikido. So they had this opportunity, and a friend of mine was in a political science class at Bemidji State University, and her instructor was saying how he's going to go over there and teach, and that she should go over there and study because it's such a great opportunity. She's like, well, I'm not sure how interested I am, but I know my friend would be because he loves martial arts and things like that. So she brought that up to me, and I started thinking about it and researching different martial arts in Japan. I was familiar with, of course, judo, karate, kendo, iaido. And then seeing that above the law when he's in the dojo, the first 3 minutes or whatnot, I mean, that just sold me. I'm like, this is the technique. Now I want to understand about the philosophy and the mental aspects of it. And so here's a time when, remember B. Dalton Books in St. Cloud?
Yep.
Yeah, at the Crossroads Center.
Yep.
So I didn't even have a credit card at this time. Poor college kid, or maybe I did, but my dad gave me his credit card. This is when you could take your dad's credit card or mom's credit card and go buy things. And he said, here, they could tell, this hockey thing was starting to affect me outside the ice rink. You know what I mean? Like studies and walking down the halls and getting irritated and getting in fights and things like that. And I just knew I had to do something different. I just wasn't happy anymore how things were going. I was fine my first year going through that, but the second year it's just like, no, because, I mean, deep down, and I think guys might vouch for me or whatnot. You feel like, I'm better than this guy, or why am I not getting this ice time, or why can't, I'd be on one of the top lines, and all of a sudden something would change, and it's just up and down. It looks great on TV and everything, but it's a tough road,
Yeah.
but it prepared me. And I didn't feel like I quit, because I played out 3 years after high school, and I kind of retired. I mean, even the best athletes in the world have to retire, right?
Yep.
So I just said, Coach, I'm done. And he respected that. I'm probably one of the only players that ever did that, to be honest with you. They just leave, I mean, I actually had a formal meeting with him and everything. But we do these dog fights in practice, and one of my best friends to this day on the team, I mean, dump the puck in the corner, and you got to go in and you make contact, and one guy comes out with the puck, and I was going to go and play the body on him, and hockey's a physical sport, especially physical back when I played,
Yep.
It's still physical, and I went in the corner, and he tried to do this kind of spin move right at the last second. And I mean, it's hard to stop, right? And my intention wasn't to hit him from behind. That's Cardinals say you never hit a guy from behind, but he tried to, manipulate where I'm going to miss him and kind of roll off me. And I crushed him. I mean, to the point where I heard him scream, like I thought I broke his neck or something,
Dang.
And I mean, I dropped my stick and I dropped my gloves. I'm looking at my hands. I'm like, what am I becoming? So this was going on. And so I knew, and it wasn't me, it's not the kind of person I am. Anybody who knows me and, how I was, it's respect everyone, fear no one, things like that. I didn't act, like I'm anything special, anything, stay humble. I wasn't this fighter and whatnot. I wasn't afraid to do that, but you have to do that. And so I was becoming someone different. So my parents were noticing this, and my dad said, hey, you're studying about this Aikido thing. He's like, take my credit card when you're home here, go to the Crossroads, buy anything you can find on Aikido. And so I went there, and there were like 2 martial art books that I found. And one was Aikido for Life by Gaku Homa. And the other one was The Zen Way to the Martial Arts by Taisen Deshimaru. And those were the 2 books that I could find. And I started reading this Aikido for Life. And I'm like, man, this is the philosophy. No tournaments or competition. Here I played nearly 17 years of competitive sports, and I was just burnt out. I mean, there's a place for it. It's awesome, but I was burnt out. And here, that's the one thing about traditional Aikido. There's no tournaments or competitions. So that philosophy, and then the techniques, seeing, in the early 90s or early 90s for me, Seagal in the dojo there and above the law, I mean, that was sold. And I was just set. I'm going to get to Japan. And again, coming back to, you can only go there with like a U.S. passport for 3 months. So you need, either a student visa or a working visa. And so for me to go there for any significant period of time, I needed to be enrolled in school. You just can't, I could pack up and go for 3 months, but I'd have to come back. So that is why I decided to pack my bags, leave Bemidji State, and enroll in Minnesota State University Akita. And I found myself in Japan in 1992, fall of 92.
Wow. First of all, a couple of crazy similarities. So, I mean, like I said, I grew up in Little Falls, and my first martial arts instructor was also because of the Karate Kid. It premiered in Little Falls in my hometown in June of '84. And when we walked out of the movie theater, the local Tung Sudo school was in the lobby handing out free passes.
Awesome.
And that's when I started martial arts. And that instructor actually still teaches in St. Cloud. So it's St. Cloud Tung Sudo, or St. Cloud Subak Do, it's called now.
Yeah, Bill Nelson.
Yeah, Bill Nelson. Yep.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah.
Humble guy. Wonderful man.
And I also trained in Shotokan with Tim Keel in St. Cloud when I was in high school.
Yeah, another really, really great person.
So yeah, that's kind of cool.
One of my students was a student of Tim Keel, so I haven't met him a couple times, but they're both just outstanding pioneers.
So when you very first met Tim, like I did you think, my God, he looks like Chuck Norris?
Absolutely.
I just had that conversation with someone else too. So
that's so funny. Yeah,
he still does it. When I interviewed him on the show a couple of years ago, I'm like, man, he still looks like Chuck. He kind of laughed about it, but yeah, that's funny.
Well, it's kind of like everybody starting Aikido in the 90s. We're growing their hair out in a ponytail and, trying to look like Seagal, I think, too, at that time. Isn't that funny?
Yep. Oh, yeah. My good friend of mine, Jerry, who's just retired a couple of years ago was a Taekwondo instructor for 30 years. But when I first met him, he had the long, black, slick back hair with the ponytail. And I used to tease him. He's like, I don't know who Steven Seagal is. I'm like, yeah, you do. And now, of course, he's bald like me, but
yeah,
kind of funny. But so then once you got to Japan, what steps did you go through to find which instructor, which school you wanted to train with?
Yeah. So I that was why I went to Japan. I wasn't going there. I mean, obviously, culture is important, language is important, and being able to, be there for a significant time, and I planned on maybe 1 or 2 years and didn't know it'd be about a decade. But so I went there and I rolled in the school there, and it's a little bit like the Karate Kid as well. This campus was in a place called Uamachi. It was kind of out in the countryside, just a beautiful area where there's an airport, but it's far from the city, and nobody knew about Aikido. Of course, they knew about Kendo and Judo, and, all the tournament-based ones, but people are, I don't know, And so Daniel's son painted fence. Well, I sanded and painted steel roof, And the funny story is that they bussed us into the city just to have an experience in the city. And, everybody was ready to go back. And I didn't want to go back yet. So one of the students, the Japanese students who could speak some English, stayed there with me in the city. Akita is in northern Japan there, and beautiful countryside and whatnot. But so this friend or this acquaintance at the time stayed with me, and I would go to like the little fish market and help these older ladies like haul coolers of ice and things like that. And I was kind of like their guinea pig. They were laughing so hard because they'd, feed me all this stuff because I'd kind of try anything. I didn't care. And I wanted to learn the language and I wanted to be immersed in the culture. Okay. And so I didn't want to leave, this area. We went to this little fish market and all this, and I felt like I'm really in Japan here. Right. And so this person said, well, I'll help you get back and I'll show you how to get back. So then you can come in on your own anytime and whatnot, because we'd just gotten there. So when we got back, she actually invited me to the local bar. They called it the Banana Fish. That was a stone throw away from the campus or whatever. It's still there. And so I went there and she was working there. And so steel roof and a glass of beer are kind of my story where I got going on this. But they had these cups. They serve beers in smaller cups. Like they'll share a bottle and pour it, right? And it's a smaller glass, taller than a shot glass and whatnot. But it had all this kanji on it. And I'm like, this is so cool. And so I asked her to ask they call it the master son. He was just the head of the bar or whatever, owner of the shop and stuff, if I could buy the glass, if I could purchase it. And he's like, this guy must be a nice guy. He's an honest guy, because most of the foreigners come here and just steal them. All the Americans come and just, they come home from the bar at night and they all have his cups or whatever. They're gone. So I asked him if I could buy it, and he sold me the cup for a couple bucks or whatever it was, yen. 200 yen or 500 yen or whatever it was. And then he asked this student who was working for him to ask me if I wanted a job. And the job was to come to his house and store that was down in the village area, not right by the campus, and to actually sand this steel roof and repaint it. And so I thought, what the heck, I could make a few bucks while I'm trying to, find Aikido and this and that. And he taught me how to use chopsticks properly and kind of little life lessons and things. And so being that I didn't speak any Japanese, and so they found another student at the college who barely spoke English, and the two of us were up on this roof. I mean, it took us like 2 months to do. It was so huge. Hand sand and painted. And that's a whole funny story in itself. But anyway, we're there together, spending months together. And one time we're sitting there watching a beautiful sunset. He asked me, why are you here? Why are you in Japan? And I said, well, I want to do Aikido. And he's like, oh yeah, Aikido. And we're still working a few days or weeks or whatever it is. And then pretty soon he's like, oh, my uncle do Aikido. I wanted to throw him off the top of the roof. I'm like, introduce me, and then I find out that he did Aikido, this guy.
Oh,
the Japanese people are really humble. I mean, it took me like almost 2 months to get an introduction, and I've been spending days and hours with this gentleman up on the roof. Wow. And we're still friends to this day. But anyway, the interesting thing, and this is where it's really crucial, I believe, is that, finding the right instructor. And I asked him, I told him how I want the most traditional style. I want to start from square one. I packed up, left everything to come here to do this. And he said, okay, here's the guy you want to learn from. That was my first teacher, Shigeru Kwabe Sensei. And he said, the reason why is he's got a very traditional dojo, but he's also connected not only to the world headquarters in Tokyo, but to the birthplace in Iwama and Morihiro Saito. And he said, that's where you want to go. And man, kudos to this guy, because he could have easily said, learn from my teacher, and he didn't. He could have easily said, well, you should learn from my father's teacher. There's like 4 teachers in the area, all within maybe a half hour if you could drive, and I couldn't. That's another story how I got into the dojo. But so not his teacher, not his uncle's teacher, and they're all good teachers. And then not the gentleman who lives the closest to the campus, but this guy, Shigeru Kabi Sensei, because of his connection and how he teaches and how you'll like that. And so he set up an interview. You couldn't just show up and start training. It wasn't a health club. It was a private, they call it a Senmon dojo, like a professional dojo only for Aikido at the time. And so he set up an interview with me and Kabi Sensei, and I brought my book, that Aikido for Life. Nice. The first book I read was by Gozo Shiota. It was at our library in Bemidji. I'm trying to think what it was called, Dynamic Aikido. But the first book I ever owned and purchased was that Aikido for Life. And that was like my Aikido Bible. I read it. It was so easy to read. You start reading it, you're done soon. I've given it to my parents to read because, all the other very philosophical books are tough to get through from someone who's just kind of has a side interest to kind of know what you're doing.
Right.
But anyway, I brought this book, and when he said, why Aikido, I showed him the book, and he said, he's here. And I'm like, huh? He's like, he's here. The author of the book. He's like, he'll be here at your first training in this dojo. Once he accepted me. So Gakuhoma Sensei. And there's nowhere, I don't think anywhere in that book that he had says that he's from Akita Prefecture, Japan, where I was. And I read that book when I was in Bemidji, in Bemidji, which is interesting. So I brought the book, met Kabi Sensei, and for me to be accepted and then to get there, I actually had to take a bus at 4:50 from the college, and dinner started at 5 p.m. And I take a 10-minute bus ride, and then I get on a train for about 15 minutes into the city. Then I have to walk about a half hour to the dojo, and then we train from like 6:30 to 8:30. And then I had 28 minutes to get 30 minutes back to make the last train that's going out to this Wada station. Wow. And then when I got back to the Wada station, which is a 10-minute drive, 30-minute jog, and almost an hour walk, I'd have to walk back because there was no bus anymore. Hadn't eaten, trained for a couple hours, ran for an hour, not, half hour to the dojo, half hour back to train station, but another half hour, an hour and a half to 2 hours. That's how I started it. And I would do this like 3 days a week. I didn't know about any other trainings. I just knew there was Monday, Wednesday, Friday. One time, there's this other gentleman who was teaching, I can't remember what they call it, but it was like not FIAD, but it's FIAD, not exercise science, but hyperactive or whatever they call it. And we were out mountain climbing in mountains in Japan here in Akita Prefecture. And at our break, I pulled out a book I got from the library. It's called The Spirit of Aikido by Kishimoto Ueshiba. And I'm reading. He's like, Aikido I used to do in Osaka, and I want to go and introduce me to your teacher. So I brought him in. And then we found out there's more trainings, like an open training on Sunday, and like almost like a community center on Saturday. And so I would start going to all of these things. And there's this other gentleman teaching English from Canada, and he would train on Sundays, and he trained at another dojo as well, but at nights he had to teach English. So I met him, and then we wanted to do more open training and stuff together and meeting, and we could rent like a beautiful hall in the city for like a couple bucks an hour, like a 100-mat dojo or whatever, with nice wooden kendo floors and tatami mats and things like that. But anyway, and then he was going to like drive me, because he had a car. He was going to drive me back to the station, and then I have to go back, and then I have to do that journey at night. And I'm like, no, just get me close to the dojo, And it's like a blizzard. And so this is like winter of 92. I'm 92 into 93. But anyway, so I get to this place. I have no money, just enough to get a ticket back to the campus. And I just crawl out in the entrance area because the dojo's locked, and it's just blizzarding. And I just pull out my dogi and my duffel bag and lay it down. And I'm in enough that I'm not going to get hit by a car, but there's not a lot of space there. And I'm laying down just to stay out of the wind. And I actually fell asleep because I was so tired. We trained for like 4 hours that day, and I was so tired and run down. And I'm sleeping outside the dojo, and all of a sudden I hear this gara 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 gara. And Kabi Sensei, he passes by maybe a foot or two. The little car rides right along next to me and stops, and then he goes in the back side door and he opens the dojo, traditionally from the inside, and how you turn the screws and things like that. And all of a sudden he looks down, I look up, and we see each other. And it was pretty crazy because he knew how cold it was and this and that. And he brings me into his room, which was the only place in the building. It's not a very big dojo, but it's a very authentic dojo that had a little bit of heat. And he's grabbing my hands and warming me up. And I'm sitting there and he's trying to ask me, what am I doing, or how am I here, or, and this and that. And we're drawing on the chalkboard and these things. And anyway, so it's time to start training. And we go out there and I'm the only one there because of the weather, obviously. And so he starts teaching me this suburi with the Jo staff. We have 20 individual suburi, and he teaches me about 1 through 5 for about a half hour. And he keeps looking at the clock. And by 7 o'clock, because his training started at 6:30, he goes and he locks the door, pulls the curtains back, and we go into the kitchen area, and he opens up like a hole in his kitchen floor and grabs a big bottle of sake, and we start talking about how am I getting here, what's going on, this and that, drawing pictures and things. And from that day forward, he said, when he could get me a ride to the station, because then I'd only have to walk, 45 minutes or jog 30 minutes on the way back, but just to get me to the station, so I had more time to train too, and this and that. And then from Thursday nights, I could sleep at the dojo. We didn't have class at the college on Fridays. That was all like language and cultural experience and stuff like that. So I really didn't have to be there till Monday, so I could do that bus train route. And the bus would pick you back up Monday morning because it's running. So I'd go into the dojo from Thursday night and sleep there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday till Monday morning.
Wow.
And I would train with Kwabi Sensei and help him with the kids on Thursdays. And then Fridays we had training. And then Saturdays I go to the community center with him and teach. And then Sundays we had open training in the morning for hours on end. And then Monday I'd go, and then I'd come back that evening because I go to class, come back that evening. So Tuesday was the only day we didn't have training. And then, come May of 93, I started a club on campus. I didn't know anything about Aikido, but I've been training 6-7 months or whatever it is now, and it's more than anybody there knew, right? And it was just, nobody else would take that journey with me, so I'm going to bring it to them. And then I can train 7 days a week, and that's why I did that. Nice. And so the dorms close. The Japanese school system is from April to March, and then they have graduation, and really March is off. That's kind of like their summer. It's not summer, but they have that time off. And so the dorms closed. And so we had to find a place to stay. So I got to live in Kwabi Dojo every day for that month of March in 1993. And so he's like, and then I'd chop wood and shovel and massage his back. I mean, I'd just do everything to help him and clean the dojo and train all day and this and that. So he's like, listen, there's someone better than me. There's someone I got to bring you to, and I'm going to bring you to the birthplace in Iwama. I may have seen Saito Sensei in 92 in the northern Japan. They'd have these gatherings and things like that. But I wasn't formally introduced to him until Kwabi Sensei brought me down to the birthplace with that same Canadian gentleman, Stephen Barton. And that's where I met Morihiro Saito Sensei face to face. And man, I'll never forget meeting him for the first time, seeing him on videos and in books, and just massive man, I mean, you think he's, how those people are where they put on a dogi and they just grow, Yeah.
Yep.
And it's like, he wasn't that. I mean, when people say he's only like 5'8", I'm like, really? He seemed like a mountain, and his hands are big, and he's so strong. And yeah, so I met him in 93, and then I would commute back and forth every time I could, where I'd have a month off in March, and I had the benefit of both, because the Japanese system was a month off in March, but then the American system was, the June, July, August. So I'd have these 4 months, right? And I would always spend it down in Iwama as a live-in disciple every day. You had to be there at least 14 days because the first week was hell. And then after that, you start learning the system and whatnot. So I'd go down there for 14 days, or I'd go down there for a month or 3 months. And I did that maybe a dozen times or whatever between 1993 and 1997. And then I moved full-time down there in 1997 and lived there until 2001. And that's where I got to be with Saito Sensei every single day. From 97 to 2001, started traveling. And that's what I mean by 4 years to get in with someone. That's a whole high school, college career, where of course he recognized me, he knew me, and I'd take a little bit of his uke and stuff. And I'd travel to his seminars, and he'd always be like, oh, he came again. But when I moved down there full time, that's when he really, really thought, this guy is really serious about this. And he would include me in everything he he'd always say, you're half Uchideshi because you're always at the dojo. And on Saturdays, I'd help him work. I'd travel with him months on end in Japan. And also, he got me a job through the school board because I was, teaching English, obviously. But I was, Saito Sensei would say, if you come here and you live for 2 years. Now, you have to understand, we're training minimum of 11 instructional practices a week, sometimes 4 a day in those March and summer months when there's the Gashku college season where new campuses would come week after week to have a week-long Gashku. And then our instruction, so you have 4 hours of instruction in one day. And then you have 30 minutes after each instruction to do your open training. So that's another 2 hours. You got 6 hours. And then you had to do, a couple hours of your own suburi or training or whatever. So you're getting 8 hours a day. I mean, it was intense. So he would say, if you come here for 2 years straight, you can go anywhere in the world and teach this art. That's how confident he was in his system. And so I wanted to do that. But then in between 1992 and 2002, I met a person, right? And I get married in 96. And so it's not going to happen. I'm not going to, but I got a blessing from my wife to go down there for a year. I couldn't be away from her for 2 years, but 1 year, she gave me that blessing to go down there as an Uchideshi for 1 year every day, not the 2, but 1. We'll, meet in the middle. And Saito Sensei got wind of that. And he said, hey, you come down here. I'll get you a job. Bring your wife with you and you can train in Aikido. And it was supposed to be like a 1 year contract. And then it became a 2 year, 3 year, 4 year with the city, the city, not Saito Sensei. And so that's what I mean by it took me 4 years. And I started in 1993 by scrubbing toilets. And by 2001, 2002, I was wiping the most sacred area in the Founders Dojo, the altar, and everything in between. But then in 2001, my first teacher was very sick and ill and bedridden. I just didn't feel right about coming from Minnesota to Akita, northern Japan, down to Iwama and going back to Minnesota. But I wanted to go from Minnesota up to Akita, down to Iwama, back up to Akita once before I came back to Minnesota, right? So to pay that debt of gratitude back to my teacher for being so selfless and saying, hey, learn from this guy because you can learn a lot. And so I did that because of his ailing health. And then I took over the teaching responsibility for that year at Kwabe Dojo. They were down to about 4 students when I left in 2002. They had about 30, and fast forward 20 some years later, he passed away in 2003. I lost both my teachers within a year of each other.
Wow.
He the dojo's still going, and his son is teaching there now, and a couple of great senpai that I've helped out. But my last year in Japan, 2001 to 2002, I commuted every month to see Saito Sensei when I was in northern Japan, every single month, sometimes multiple times. And then after that February, he became bedridden, unfortunately. And, even if it was just to pop in and see him over the weekend or whatever and be with him. And I was there with him even hours before he passed. So,
wow, that's what a story.
That's the short version.
Yeah. Wow. So what drew you to the teaching side of Aikido? What made you want to be a teacher? Kind
of by default, I'll be honest with you. I did not get into Aikido because I thought I want to be a teacher someday. I did it, I love discipline. I love physical activity. I was an athlete. I love, Asian philosophy, culture, and whatnot. And so I wanted to do more Aikido. So that's why I started a club. I'm like, don't they have they're like, you can make one, And so with that's that side of it. Okay. And then, coming back and seeing, no disrespect to other people or training or whatnot, but, you get raised a certain way, and then you come back and you watch and you look around and it's just not the way you were taught, and so, and if someone, if you can learn from someone who learned directly from the founder, fantastic, but those people are few and far between right now, and really how much time did they spend with the founder, right? Yeah. And so, so the next version is you try to learn under someone who learned under the founder, and Saito Sensei was with the founder from 1946 to 1969, and then after the founder passed away, from 1969 to 2002, he was the sole instructor of the founder's personal private dojo in Iwama, Ibaraki, Japan. That's a very big responsibility. And I was able to, be with Saito Sensei from 93 to 2002. Wow. So I feel like I have to preserve that and I need to teach it. I understand things change over time, but if we don't have some people who know someone quite well, you can't spend a decade with someone and not know them, right? Yeah. Good, bad, and ugly sometimes. And that's what Saito Sensei spending 23 years with the founder, that some of the things he would do were right from the founder, right? And the founder is made out to be this, this harmonious. I mean, he was pretty strict and severe behind the scenes,
Yeah.
as was Saito Sensei, but a heart of gold and a true Budoka. And Saito Sensei, a lot of people don't understand that he did karate. He was like a nidan in karate at age 18, and that was back in the day when it was not. They weren't just handing out belts. He did judo, he did kendo, and he was going to find this old mysterious man in the woods of Iwama, and who's this guy, right? And he showed him, and then he became his student for all these years. So I felt the same way with Saito Sensei. You got to have foundation, and then you can have experimentation. Then there can be innovation, but you need that preservation too, because I don't care if anybody knows who I am, but I do want them in 50 years, 100 years, 200 years to know who Morihiro Saito Sensei was and what his Aikido was like. And that's why I felt my best way to do that is to teach it. Not only my own dream was, and I do have it now, my own personal private dojo that when you're here, you feel like you're in Japan and whatnot. And I did that for my students and in honor of my teacher, not for me. I don't need, I have my dojos in Japan, the Akita dojo and the Founders dojo. But for me, that's what a dojo is, right? It's like almost like a temple or shrine. It's a place that whether you're there or not, it's waiting for you to come back to, right? And so I wanted to do that. And then I thought, how's another way that I can spread this art in a good way? Well, education, and becoming a community college instructor, faculty. I mean, the founder trained for about 80 years in his life, all said and done, studying the classics and things like that. He lived to be 85. Everybody says 86, but if you do the math, he passed away in April and he was born in December. So, but they always add, your year one, or years or whatever. But anyway, gets confusing sometimes. But and then Saito Sensei, almost 60 years. I mean, 56 years alone in Aikido, right, from 1946, right after the war, until 2002, and until his last breath. I mean, and so that's 80 or 60 years. And I did a decade in Japan. And it's people don't understand like how powerful immersion is, and especially in your formative years. I was there from age 21 to 31. I mean, that was my peak. And I also, on Thursday nights, I met this gentleman, we call him the Warrior. He did all kinds of different martial arts, and we would go there because then as I was training more and more, I was able to get away from the kids class on Thursdays, and I would go and train with this Takahashi Sensei, who nobody knows him, but he's got, like, if you add all his degrees up, it's like 20. It's just insane. Never been hit harder by someone than him, his punch and whatnot. But we do 45 minutes of some art, and then we do 45 minutes of another art, and then we do a 30-minute free-for-all. I'm talking free-for-all. And that was every Thursday. And that was really cool. I'm sorry, I got off track. I don't know where I was going with that. I was talking about teaching. Oh, yeah. So my point was about the college is that is a place, this is 150 years of experience, that maybe I can bring, with 80 years of the founder, 60 years of Saito Sensei, a decade of mine. I'm going to bring it to make it educational, because it's educational, it's life-giving. And many people are, training for an altercation in their lives that they probably won't ever happen. If they don't, they're happy. But there's something to say about martial arts and whatnot. And so I wanted to make it educational. That's why I brought it into the schools and things like that. I'd love to see it in K-12. I've tried to do that too, but the college was a good place to do that. So, and then having my own Senmon dojo. And in fact, Saito Sensei named my dojo when he was still alive in 2001. So obviously I didn't come back till after he passed away in 2002. And he and Kwabi Sensei always said they'd come one more trip to Minnesota, to the US, to see me. But then I was there until each of them passed. And in fact, Saito Sensei passed when I was there. And then Kwabi Sensei, first thing I did when I came back, I got him over here. And he passed away in February of 2003. And I just said, move back. I had him come in that fall that I essentially got back in 2002. Because I didn't want both my teachers not to come and see Minnesota. Right? Yeah. So again, just kind of paying a debt of gratitude back to them. I felt like I was able to pay a debt of gratitude back to my first teacher by coming back up and for a year straight, as much as possible, every week, multiple days a week, teach what I learned in those, near decade with Saito Sensei, 8-9 years at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and regrow that dojo, and it's still going today. But with Saito Sensei, I felt like I wasn't able to repay that debt because he passed away before I could, obviously I was around him for those, that 9 years, but those last 5 years almost every day, and be with him and be his attendant and translator and his uke for things. But my dedication or debt of gratitude back to him for the rest of my life is to teach his Aikido. And that's why I became a teacher.
Okay.
Not because I wanted to. It was a little bit by default, but I enjoy it. And you got to do a good job because lineage is so critical, and there's so many people that are just not ready, and yeah.
Nice. So talk a little bit about your dojo then. What can people expect if they come in for a class?
Authenticity.
Okay.
When you come back, you try to build a little clientele and whatnot, right? And a good way is through like maybe a community ed program or through education programs and things like that. But when you invite someone into your own home and land and whatnot, you're a little more careful and whatnot. And I'm working on that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But we do seminars twice a year here in the spring and summer. And I used to teach at a community center for a number of years, and I am still teaching at the college. And I do teach at my dojo as well. I'm teaching actually 5 days a week right now. I used to do it 6 or 7, but so authenticity, when my teacher taught, some things he would talk about is a couple things when you teach is how you teach in a way anybody and everybody can understand it, and then teach in a way that people are content with what they are being taught. And that really stuck with me as well. Another thing he talked about is 3 things: how, does the technique work? Are people enjoying themselves? And I don't mean like laughing and this, that. There's a time to be serious and there's a time to have fun, right?
Right.
But, you and I have been doing this stuff for a long time, and it's our lives, right? It's not our living, it's our lives. And then the other thing is, are the senior students taking good care of the junior students? You know what I mean? That's something you'll see in my dojo as well. Yeah, and even the scenery, when you're inside it, you feel like you're in Japan. And, you take off the shoes, you scrub the mats. I do everything the way I was taught it there. So you can get an authentic experience of how Saito Sensei taught Aikido at the end of his life. Now, when I first came back, I was still 31 and much bigger, stronger, faster. What's the old country song? I'm not as good as I once was, but once as good as I ever was. Okay. And you got about 3 times in your life, and I saved one. I was in a very serious car accident where Aikido did save my life in 2014. But after that, I feel I have nothing to prove, but I felt like I did. I had to prove to people, I had to, whether it's judo, karate, whatnot. And it was pretty rough and tough at first. And we had, people have some good stories and whatnot, but also, when I take my students over to Japan with me, I wanted them to understand what I went through to get to where I am. Like, because I'm bringing you here, they're treating you this way, but I wasn't taught, taught that way or whatever. Like, people didn't treat me that way, right? Mm-hmm. At first, I was like, here's the scrub for the benjo, and this and that. I mean, it took me a while where they come in and roll in and think they can go and sit, right up front and this and that. I mean, it took me a decade to get in the front row of that dojo,
Wow.
And that's, a lot of people that come through and things like that. So, for the first, like from 2002 to 2017, man, we'd have 30, 35 people on the mat, even at the community center. And we have where you could actually, if you were able to commute in a radius of maybe hour and a half, you could train 6 out of 7 days a week. I think the only day we weren't training was like a Friday.
Wow.
And it was intense. I mean, people breaking Joes and things. I mean, nobody got really seriously injured, but we were big, strong, and things changed.
Yeah.
I mean, all of a sudden the world shifted and life gets in the way and people are getting married, getting new jobs, having kids, going off, right? And then I have my accident and then COVID hits and then it's just it's a whole different animal. But yeah, we got to keep this stuff alive, and I try to make it very authentic. And I just, I don't chase after people and I don't recruit them. And so you get what you get. It's like if you spent 10 years in Japan, and I mean, I've spent the last, since I came back, 22, 23 years after that going back, right?
Yeah.
So it's been 30 some years. I'm not going to let like one of my students tell me how to run my dojo or we should do this, sensei, or, this is too hard or this is too that. And also, I'll never make my students do something I didn't do myself.
Right.
That's important. I think that's really, really important.
That's awesome. Very cool. So over all your years, is there one philosophy that you've learned throughout your martial arts career that's at the top of your list?
Man, there's a lot of them, but I think if I had to say one is never forget the mind of a beginner. That's really important.
Nice.
In Japanese, you say shoshin wasuru bekarazu because, and I mean, even as an athlete, you're only as good as your worst player sometimes, right? And you gotta build people up, right? And you never know, like, when I showed up at the Iwama Dojo in 1993 and in Japan in 1992, this little guy with a mullet and a white belt, 10 years later, you didn't know that I'd still be there, right? And so I had a few people that treated me in a different way, and I made sure I sent them a message before I returned. Yeah, and so I tell students that, I mean, you're in the nosebleed one day and people stop and people go away, and all of a sudden you're moving up and up and you're there, I mean, people will come and people will go, and in the end, the real ones will be there, I mean, the founder, Saito Sensei was there at the end of the founder's life. I was there at the end of Saito Sensei's life, Kawabe Sensei's life. I wasn't the only one, of course, but I'm just saying. But also, you're never done training. And if you're not training, you're not training. And so, this idea of the senseitis, that you think that I'm the teacher now and I know it. No, you got to learn. And you learn so much from teaching. And the more I teach, the more years I do Aikido, it's not the more I learn that I know, it's the more I learn that I don't know, right? And that's so important. I mean, and Saito Sensei said this one time too. He said, when you're done getting instructed, you're done. And he doesn't mean you've graduated. It means you're finished. You'll never grow. I mean, I can't believe all the students that got to a certain level and then they just kind of disappear and they'll never know what they don't know, right? It's just incredible. So stay humble, be kind, take it seriously. That's more than one philosophy, but this all comes back to keep that mind of a beginner, always learn, and don't think you're the best or truest. It doesn't exist in any art, right? It's the person, not the art. All the arts are great. I've seen great people in all arts. I've seen people who aren't so great in these arts, but it's really important to always learn. And that's why, I invite people to teach here that I revere and respect. They weren't my teachers. My teacher was Kawabe Sensei and Saito Sensei in this art, but these other gentlemen who are women as well, who were there before me, or I revere them. That's because both my teachers are gone. So I have to have someone to be mentored by and keep learning and keep perfecting my own art. You're never done, right?
Right. That's cool. And how about over your martial arts career, worst martial arts related injury?
Elbow.
Okay.
Didn't you do, Brian, did you do a little bit of Aikido?
Yeah, I did for about 7 months when I was in college, 5 days a week, every morning at 7 a.m.
Okay, awesome.
It was brutal. It was brutal.
Yeah. Do you remember the term rokyo? Rokyo, it's like hijijime, where you turn the arm over and then you go after the elbow.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah, rokyo. Yeah, if you know the technique if you saw it. But anyway, I got rokyoed by a very, very well-known Aikido person, and not just once. He hit it once and I looked up like, what was that? And he hit it 2 more times and it was not Saito Sensei. I could probably give the name if you want it, but
that's up to you. So
yeah. People who know me know, but I don't, if I don't have anything good. I love this man and I respect him, but he also trained military people, and I went to his camp 6 summers for the Japan Air Self-Defense Forces. And I tell you what, this guy used to go around and challenge all kinds of people, and he's very rough and tough, and I don't know what message he was trying to send to me or whatnot, but I just got so, lackadaisical, because I was too used to how powerful and graceful and in control that Saito Sensei was. I never, ever, ever felt in danger with his technique, and it was to feel it was just something else. I mean, he used to feel the founder of the art, right? And then I got to feel Saito Sensei, and that's what I want to give to my students. But I think this gentleman, wonderful martial artist, very, very Budo, very, very tough. But I think he wanted to kind of show me how he's strong too, and I wasn't doubting that. But I was, being his partner, and he was showing people how to do a technique, and he just hammered me, and then I must not have tapped hard enough and saying ouch, ouch, because I wasn't used to that.
Yeah.
Where I trained, you had to kind of take it a little bit, and you also had to make the person move. They wouldn't just move with you, right? You started that static, and then we move into more flowing and whatnot. and he just went off on me. So an elbow, and it took probably about 7 to 9 months before I would even, I trained every day. I didn't do anything about it, but when I'd swing my bokken, I'd still get a nerve would shoot up my arm and stuff like that. And even to this day, I can't really extend it as far as I want. And sometimes I see that on some videos and things like that. I'm like, that's my arm, but oh well. But that was a bad injury. I'm glad I had big hockey elbows at the time.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you remember the very first student when you opened your school that you brought from beginner all the way to black?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do. Do you want to know his name?
Are they still with you too, or do they?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, one of those ones. 5 years, get your black belt, gone.
That's good.
Good
though.
martial arts, though. Very good martial arts. Good man. Did a lot of Shotokan. Got into BJJ, and in his credit too, he was still training like Shotokan, and also you got a young family, and I moved down a little bit further away to get closer to my work.
Okay.
I didn't want to be commuting 65 miles, but yeah, I just disappeared. But I got the next guy. Yeah, the next guy has been with me for since 2003. He was at the second session, and he's still here. What's that? 22 years.
That's
22 years, over 20 years. Yeah, 22 years, and he's still here.
That's good. Congrats to him. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's one thing I didn't. Where exactly is your dojo located? I never asked you that.
The Elk River area.
Okay.
Do you know Elk River?
Right my good friend of mine from high school lives in Elk River. So
yeah, little out in the countryside. You should come see us sometime.
I will. Next time I'm down there, I'll definitely plan on that. So that'd be kind of fun. It'd be fun to check out and see an authentic one. So that'd be cool.
Yes. I'm not saying I'm the only one who has one. I'm just saying that's what it is. It's very authentic. I mean, you're going to get what Saito Sensei taught you. I can promise you that. I don't know a lot of things in life, but I know the last decade of Morihiro Saito Sensei's and my teacher, and how he would like me to do certain things. And
that's cool.
That's one thing I'm pretty confident in.
Nice. So what are your thoughts on something like MMA and the UFC type stuff? Is that something you're a fan of?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Nice.
If I could, make money doing that, I would do it if I was a lot younger. And like I said, my buddy Corey Bellino, who fought professionally, and he's probably only about 5 years younger than me, but he just kind of missed that time. I mean, he was trying to kind of do an MMA before MMA probably. He was him and Gary were going out and doing all these tournaments and stuff when I was in, I was playing college hockey. I can't just leave like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, great athletes, and it really took off more. I mean, obviously I saw the first UFC and whatnot, but when I was over in Japan, when it got big here and stuff, but there was like Pride and whatnot over in Japan.
Pride, yeah.
And, Rickson Gracie was huge over there. He's what a warrior, and he's both, I mean, he can do the in the cage, but also the budoka, he's not just the athlete. He lives his life that way. And, very, very impressive. I mean, all the Gracies, obviously, but I'm just saying, like, I followed a little more Rickson because he was over in Japan.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cool. But, this idea that, with the internet today, it's just, anybody who's really good at a martial art, the last thing they're going to do is talk bad about another martial art, because they know it's not the art, it's the person, you know. I mean, and I've seen guys, I've played ice hockey with guys that don't need martial arts. They're fighters. They can fight. And think about fighting on two sword blades, out on the ice. It's like concrete. I mean, this is, and that's where people would try to bait people to kind of feed into that and badmouth, and that's where Rickson Gracie would not do that, and he also loves the tradition of it, and that's why. But this, the old saying, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight unless you're 21 feet or whatever, or I mean, it's just that a lot of there's still rules, and. I don't know. I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to bust a computer. That's why I just stay off the internet and all that stuff. I mean, people put stuff out there and recordings of me or whatever, but I don't do a lot of that stuff. I mean, I'm old school. I'll swing the sword. I'll do this and that. And I'm like, to the students, it's your job. You can do that. I don't, and then all of a sudden they're fabricating, getting things wrong. I'm like, no, okay, I got to control this or whatever, it just, they mean well, but they don't know, and so, yeah, it's just, a lot of altercations out there, one-on-one, you're going to be on the ground, but what if it's two-on-one? What if a guy has a knife? What if a guy has a gun? What if a guy has a Joe or a bow? Traditional Aikido, you can use a weapon, right? I mean, that's part of my curriculum. So, it's like everybody's like, oh, why isn't it in the MMA and this and that? It's like, oh my gosh. I mean, anybody good at something wouldn't say that. Otherwise, they're a little bit of a meathead, maybe. I mean, I tell you what, I gave up my career, my life to go over there. Met my wife, had my kids, what I've dragged them through in the last 35 years or, 30 years, the sacrifices, the time away, the money, the this and that, my body, the beating it, the 17 years of training before I went over there. That's what you're up against, not Aikido. Yeah. I don't even know if I'd use Aikido in a fight. I learned Aikido to not fight,
exactly.
And I tell you what, I would have never continued it had I not met my instructors.
Yeah.
Right. If I would have met someone else, maybe I was there for a year or whatever. Maybe I came back and started doing Taekwondo or Kempo or BJJ or karate. I like physical contact.
Mm-hmm.
I liked having a weapon in my hand. It felt natural. I'm not saying Aikido is any better than any other art, but it's no less than any other art either.
It's better for you, though.
It is.
That's the important thing.
It is. And that's what you got to find. You find good instruction. You find what is meaningful and, have a purpose in life. And for me now, thanks to Aikido, I've met people from all over the globe. I have a purpose is try to preserve as much as I can what I learned in that short amount of time. I mean, it was 10 years, but it was well more than 10,000 hours. And it took me another 5 years to process everything, and I'm still processing it and learning with my body and whatnot. But I just want to kind of share that with others. And if it can add to their lives, great. And if it helps them in an incident in their life where it gets them out of something, it was well worth it if it can save one life. And it already saved mine. Like I said, there's no way when I'm driving and taking a turn and someone coming at me head on, I wouldn't have had the calmness I had I not been training and then react the natural way I did at impact. It saved me. It saved my life. Yep. And I value my life and I hope my family does too. And that's why here I am. And I want to keep that tradition alive for people to pick and choose and to add something to their lives. Yeah.
Nice. All right. I got a few fun questions to wrap up the interview. Now you talked a little bit about MMA and you said maybe when you were younger, you would have done it. But so let's say you decided you were going to step into the octagon. What's your walk-up song going to be? What music's playing as you're taking that walk into the cage?
Well, the first one that would come to my mind, but I think it's a little too cliche, would be "We Will Rock You," but by Queen. But when I played hockey in the early '90s, our locker room was blaring with Metallica. So I got to go Metallica here. Not Enter Sandman, that's what we listened to. But how about "Wherever I May Roam"? That first minute, that intro, kind of slow and builds up. Do you know that song, "Wherever I May Roam"?
Yep, I'm familiar with it.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's cool. I like it. It's a good answer. And I don't think anyone's ever said "We Will Rock You."
Really?
I don't. I'm thinking back. I mean, there's usually the go-to. Most people pick like "Eye of the Tiger" or something like that. But that's
we're dating our ages, right? But I don't think. How do you say? I'm not worthy of saying "We Will Rock You." Let me just put it that way. That's why I didn't.
Hey, mine is "You're the Best" from Karate Kid. So
beautiful, beautiful.
All right. Yeah. Who are 3, 4, 5 names you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
Well, obviously, I would say the founder of Aikido, and I'd like to, for yourself too, you had a little experience with Aikido, but others, if they're really interested, they should really get that Audible called Art of Peace. Not the book. The book is the founder's poems, everything, but the Audible, because the Audible has a chapter 1 and chapter 2 in it. One's 15 minutes about the art of war. The other one's an hour you have to listen to, and it's about a biography of the founder. The founder was a phenomenal man, and he was just a trailblazer, and so I definitely have to, without the founder of Aikido, I wouldn't have met my teacher, Saito Sensei. And I'm going to put Saito Sensei on there too because of how he made it make sense. The founder didn't teach in numbers. He didn't codify things. It'd be like, it's like this, do this. Saito Sensei made it into a system where we can teach it, learn it, and preserve it.
Yeah. Of
course, I respect my first teacher, Kwabe Sensei, and this Takahashi Sensei, who's like a Budo mentor to me. But if I had to name 4, it would be Morihei Ueshiba Sensei, O-Sensei, Morihiro Saito Sensei, Bruce Lee, absolutely. I mean, that's what got me started.
Yep.
And what an interview. I mean, to be 32 years old and how he lived his life, full life in that short amount of time. Can you imagine? Like I said, he'd be turning 85 this year.
Yeah.
He could still be alive,
I know. It's crazy.
Just think of what he would have done. I mean, And then I'm going to go old school. Tsukahara Bokuden was a famous sword master, even before Miyamoto Musashi's time. And he had influence on even Kurosawa's Shinen Samurai. And even Bruce Lee looked up to him about that. Muteryu, the way of no hands or the sword of no hands or whatnot, no sword. But Tsukahara Bokuden, he's also the kind of known as the founder of Kashima. Shinto-ryu, the sword method. And man, that's one of my favorite places in all of Japan is the Kashima Shrine and whatnot. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And if you get to Kashima Shrine, go to Katori as well. They're close by. They're both phenomenal. But the Kashima Forest, you walk through that energy. So yeah, Morihei Ueshiba, Morihiro Saito, of course, all senseis, Bruce Lee and Tsukahara Bokuden.
Nice. I like it. All right. How about a favorite martial arts book?
Man, I've read a lot, but I think if I had to pick one, have you ever heard of Beyond the Known?
I don't.
The Ultimate Goal of Martial Arts by Tri Thong Dang. The reason why I'm choosing this one is because it's fictional, but you can tell this gentleman is telling his own stories, and it's about this great Tai Chi master and even influence from Morihei Ueshiba of Aikido, but it's really about the art of discipleship. And it's a book, Brian, that I have read at least a dozen times, maybe more. I even when I teach English at the college, I teach with that book.
Okay.
So I have to introduce it. I mean, of course, you've got the Art of War, you got the Daoji Kundo, you got Bushido by Nitobe Inazo, the traditional Aikido volumes 1 through 5 in the 70s by Saito Sensei, and on and on and on. But if someone, this book probably was published in about 1993. It was shortly after I got to Japan, but Beyond the Known, The Ultimate Goal of Martial Arts, and it's by Tri Thong Dang. It's a good one.
Okay.
The Art of Discipleship, How to Be a Good Student.
That one to my list here. So
yes,
cool.
I highly recommend it. Quick read to it, easy.
We'll see if you have an answer for this one. Favorite martial arts video game?
I was not much of a gamer, but I tell you what, I loved arcade game. Karate Champ. Wasn't it called Karate Champ?
Yep.
And then they went on to like Kung Fu Master, but I loved the Karate Champ.
Yeah. There's a few spots. You can find that online and still play it, actually.
Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, otherwise, I got kind of lost after the Nintendo. So I'd have to, if it was video games, maybe saving the Princess from the Dragon, as Mario and fighting the dragon or fire-breathing dragon. But I just wasn't much of a gamer. Okay. I was always outside and always in athletics. I mean, I didn't just play ice hockey and football and ran track. I mean, I did about every athletic under the sun until you had to kind of specialize, right? Yeah. I mean, by season. And about in 7th grade, you had to kind of pick and choose. And the only reason I didn't play baseball after that was because my football coach was a track and field coach, so I didn't have a choice. He's like, you like to run the ball? Yeah. Well, I'll see you on the track field. I'm like, huh?
Nice.
So I did football hockey track. But yeah, I was not a big gamer. And then when my kids, they love it. And when you have to move your hands, all these different buttons. Once it stopped being a joystick. I was just like lost it. Loved the Nintendo. Did that a little bit in college with the boys, playing Nintendo hockey and golf and Mario. But I got to go with Karate Champ. Yep, the arcade game.
I like it. All right. How about favorite martial arts TV show?
Oh, it's got to be Kung Fu. I loved Kung Fu. Nice. Very inspirational. You know what? I tell you what, though, another one, Brian, was Vanishing Sun.
I loved it. Russell Wong.
Yeah. That would be
a good show.
My other one. Old school would be Kung Fu, and then Vanishing Sun would be. I mean, I know there's a lot of other ones, but those really just made an impression on me. Right?
Yeah, I'm trying to get Russell on the show. I've asked.
Awesome.
No, so far no luck, but fingers crossed, man. I'd love to have a chat with him. So
I tried to get my kid to play the violin and do martial arts.
That's awesome. All right, how about a favorite martial arts movie?
Movies, yeah, lots of good ones. I got to give credit to Above the Law. That first 3 minutes in the dojo, that's what sold me. But you got to understand, this is 1990, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and I actually met Seagal a couple times.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know one of his teachers quite well.
Nice.
Hiroshi Isayama. He's in Iwama or whatever. I actually met Mr. Miyagi too. And
really?
One of my favorite moments though was meeting Sonny Chiba, who's kind of the Bruce Lee of Japan.
Yeah.
Nicest guy in the world. I was at this Kyokushin karate tournament and people were lined up, and this gentleman I was kind of introducing you about, who's a professional calligrapher swordsman. Nobody knows him, but he's just absolute deadly. Mm-hmm. He's in northern Japan, lives in a mountain by the sea. I mean, we call him the warrior. But anyway, he wanted Sonny Chiba's autograph on this hard cardboard shikishi, and he was too embarrassed to ask for it. And I'm like, well, I'll go ask him, And I went and stood in this line, and when I got up to Sonny Chiba, I was like the only foreigner there, because this was like an all Japan thing or whatever in northern Japan. And he was there, and he had me sit down next to him, and he's talking to me and he's asking me all these questions. I mean, there's people lining up and nicest, most gentle guy, Hattori Hans,
Yep.
He was so cool. And I mean, I probably spent, it felt like a forever, it felt like an infinity, but it was probably, 10, 15 minutes sitting next to him, just talking to him the whole time. Like he's like signing and just talking to me.
Yep.
But I was the only non-Japanese at this select kind of, I don't know what. So he was probably interested in why I'm here. And what a gentleman. He's like, so do you do martial arts? I said, yeah, I do a little bit of Aikido. And he's like, oh, Aikido is very good. And he's just very complimenting, just a gentleman. And Mr. Miyagi was cool as heck. I almost couldn't remember his real name. And that his, that accent is he made that up.
Yep, exactly.
He
yep.
created that, and it took me years before I figured that out, right? And I almost wanted to yell, Mr. Miyagi. I was actually at a Tyson fight in 1999, January of 99 in Vegas. And all the big wigs kind of walk through and they block you off. And then, but coming out, they kind of go out which way or whatever. And I'm sitting there and Mr. Miyagi walks out.
Wow.
And my only regret to this day is that I didn't ask him for a picture. I know he would have, but I didn't want to, I don't do that when I see these people. I don't want to cause attention.
Yeah.
In fact, I was in Vegas one time, even earlier, I saw Andre Agassi and
love Agassi.
And this was like in 91 or whatever. It was before I went to Japan. So he was just a stud, and I kind of to the big guy next to him, is your friend Andre Agassi by chance? And he's like, I don't know. He's not my friend. And all of a sudden I went and I said, are you Andre Agassi? He's like, yeah, why? And I said, oh, it's just fun. I said, I play tennis. I don't play tennis. I'm just like, I just shook his hand and I walked away and these girls ran up to me, was that Andre Agassi? I shook my head, no. And they're like, oh, and then they went the other way and he looked at me, he goes, he just, he mouthed it. He's like, thank you, So I had some things like that, but Mr. Miyagi snuck out a side door into I can't remember what it was like I can't remember, maybe a food area. I mean, the lights were dark and there was like a, one of those ribbons pulled across that you couldn't go through. And then there was like a stairwell and he went down and I caught him right before it. He was cool. And I had a camera with me, I was in Vegas, and not a cell phone or anything like that. It was like a little 35-minute Kodak camera. I guarantee he would have been okay with that. How cool would that have been? But you think these people are going to be here forever. Yeah. You just don't think about it. And I didn't want to ruin the moment. I don't want to leave him alone, right? But I'm like, hey, he's pretty cool. But yeah, that awesome. Blah blah blah. But hey, another quick cool movie. There's a lot. I was a big fan of Kurosawa. The Shichinen Samurai. Yes. Yojimbo, Sanjuro, and beyond that. But there's this one, if you're a fan of The Last Samurai, there's something called The Hidden Blade.
I've heard of it, yep.
Okay, and it was in about 2004, so it's awesome. It's set at the same time as The Last Samurai. It's very authentic. I just love that movie. It's very educational. It's great. Obviously, I love anything with Sanada in it, too. He's kind of like the modern-day Mifune Toshiro, Hiroki Sanada. Great job. Cool. Twilight Samurai and stuff like that. But yeah, The Hidden Blade is one I would recommend people who like Japanese culture and samurai and whatnot. It's just very, very educational. It has a little bit of everything in it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to maybe find a link for it and put it with the episode. But
they have subtitles. It's,
that's what doesn't bother me. But it's funny too. You mentioned meeting people like that and not having a camera, or even that you had one. Like I never used to carry a camera with me.
No.
And when I lived in California for a year, I won tickets on the radio in February of '97 or January '97 to go when they re-released Star Wars Episode 4 in theaters, and I got to go to the Hollywood premiere of it, and I actually met Mark Hamill, and I so regret not having a camera. I'm like, I freaking met Luke Skywalker and didn't have a camera with me. It's so depressing.
That's really cool.
After that, I started bringing one with. So.
Yeah, and I never took pictures either. And I didn't, the only reason I had the camera at that time was my wife didn't want to hold it anymore. And so she asked me to hold it or something like that. And she was going to go to the bathroom or something because she wasn't there we were there together.
Yeah.
And then we couldn't both afford to go to the Tyson fight. So I went, and maybe that's why maybe she said, well, you should take this in case you see someone or something. Maybe that's all it was. But I had it in my pocket. I totally forgot I had it. But and I met like my favorite sumo wrestler in Japan during the Nagano Olympics too.
Nice.
Miterai, smaller guy, just awesomely powerful.
Cool.
And I just went in, shook his hand. I just shake their hand, say hi. on my way back from Germany recently. I was actually via Sweden, flew to Germany, came back, and Dirk Nowitzki, it was during when the Mavericks and the Timberwolves are playing.
Yeah.
And we're like at 5 a.m. in this fast pass or whatever. This guy is really tall. And what a gentleman too. And I just, and they're like screening him and he's like turning around circles and this and that. He's just cool. And I just got my stuff. We're going through security together and I'm just like, "Are you Dirk?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I just shook his hand. I said, "Man, you're legendary." I said, my son's a big fan of yours." I just shook his hand. Just leave him alone. I just,
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm not sitting here trying to name drop, but I'm just like, when we talk about these things, I think it's kind of cool that I got to see Mr. Miyagi. I didn't spend much time with him. I spent it felt like forever, but I mean, maybe I was there a half, I don't know, but Sonny Chiba was long. Like I was almost getting embarrassed by holding up the line and, like his like team was kind of like, "Sonny, this guy's got to go," and I'm like, he's most welcoming to me. And I'm thinking, I got to leave here. And he's just so interested in me. He's so cool. So cool.
That's
and
awesome.
Then, meeting Seagal, that was an interesting thing too. I met him actually in Tanabe where the founder was born. And there was this big 30-year anniversary of the founder passing away that was also in 1999. And I knew the people there. And so they had me translating and kind of working. So I was actually kind of almost working for Seagal, not hired on his side, but on the other side of it, right? Kind of like the bodyguard for Seagal. Like you need that at the time. And, Japanese people, what do you have to block them from maybe taking a picture or whatever? They're not going to do anything at that time, right?
Right.
It's a very, very easy job. So I, escorted him to his like locker room area, whatever. And he kind of asked where everybody was. And I just said, "Hey, I just want to thank you what you did for the art and this and that. And my name's Mark Larson." He's like, "So where are you from?" I should have said Iwama, Ibaraki, but I'm like Minnesota. And I may tell you what, you're in Japan and it's hard to get to this place that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was on screen or something, and he's like, "You're a long way from home, Dorothy." I didn't know to laugh or to punch him or I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But he was very, very generous to me. But I was in a very kind of elite Aikido crowd with his teacher at the time as well. His teacher's like grabbing me and he's like, "Hey, Steven, see, this guy, he trains in Iwama, and he's Saito Sensei's doing and yada, 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 yada." And actually, in my earlier days too, I actually went to his so-called dojo in Osaka, where his family had it, his in-laws or whatever had it, and met his Japanese ex-wife, wonderful, wonderful person, and daughter and things like that. And Jackie Chan has just been there. In fact, they showed me some pictures and so I didn't meet Jackie Chan, but
Dang.
But it was pretty cool. So
it's good.
Yeah. And like I said, I met him and someone took a picture and I have a picture of that, but I've never put it on my website or anything like that or anything. No disrespect, but it's like, I was a huge fan, but the more I got into Aikido and the more, time went by, I kind of became less and less. No disrespect at all.
I get it.
He spent a lot of time in Japan and I trained at the place, that the founder was and with Saito Sensei and Seagal would go there for the Taisai and the celebration and whatnot. But I don't think he trained on those mats, maybe his students did and whatnot. But he definitely trained, in Osaka and with Isayama Sensei who was there in Iwama as well. And I know he liked Saito Sensei's Aikido as well because it's a little more direct and whatnot. And when Saito Sensei would go to the Osaka area, I think Seagal would go and visit him and whatnot. But yeah, hey, you can go anywhere in the world and say, "Do you know Steven Seagal?" And they'll say, "Yeah," but I'll say, "Do you know Morihiro Saito?" And they'll be like, "Who?"
Exactly.
Yeah, and he learned from the founder for 23 years and then taught at his dojo for all those years after. So like I said, no disrespect to anybody. And you got to give credit where credit's due. Had I not read that book, Aikido for Life, had I not watched the movie Above the Law, I would not have had the interest in Aikido at that time. And the timing was perfect for me.
Nice.
I was perfect timing. And also, I really think that my closeness with Saito Sensei was a number of things. I'd been in Japan for a number of years at the time. I'd show up all the time. I could speak the language at that time good enough. Not at the start, of course not. My wife's from Japan and would put up with me being gone, and she knew it wasn't from here to the horizon. It just, everything fell into place. It wasn't that I was anything anything special or anything like that. But I kept showing up, and I had an opportunity. I made the most of it. And I know my career before that really helped me thrive in that situation. And you never know when he's going to stop inviting you. And he just didn't, He got comfortable with me, and, we had a very strong relationship beyond the mat. He met my wife and my son. My daughter was only 6 months when he passed, and she was up north at the time, so he didn't. But he'd always ask about her, of course. And then he met my parents, my in-laws, my brother and sister. I mean, that's very rare, And what I learned most from Saito Sensei was the time we spent together off the mat, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Even though I learned a ton when I was on the mat. But just the timing was everything. Yeah, very grateful for it, and that's why I owe that back to him, because he's helped me meet people from all over the globe,
That's good. All right, final question. Now this one
Yes.
doesn't have to be a martial arts movie. Any movie you've ever seen, favorite movie fight scene?
Well, oh man, there's so many, but you know what I'm going to go with is one that sticks in my head, that inspired me, and I just can still remember it. It's The Game of Death. It's Bruce Lee against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That was The Game of Death, right?
Yep, that was.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
I haven't, but yeah, the yellow jumpsuit and just the athleticism. And I think when Kareem could kick,
Oh yeah.
That was impressive. And when he'd go down on a knee, he was still, I think, taller than Bruce Lee. I mean,
Yep.
and just with some grappling and wrestling, and just Bruce Lee was just the things he'd do, and and there's some more, obviously, but I mean, just trailblazer, innovator, just unbelievable, the respect and what he did at, he's 20 years younger than I am now, when he passed, it's just what he could have done, or what he already did.
Yeah.
Was incredible. I mean, I just so honored and to know some people that learned his style and whatnot. In fact, my buddy who was helping me try to find that first teacher I had. Can I just read this quick to you?
Yeah,
it's really
definitely.
short. When Bruce Lee passed away, I was only 7. This is not the old gentleman that I met. This is the guy at Bemidji that we're still friends with. I was just talking to him the other day, in fact. He's in his late 50s now, probably. But I was only 7 years old when Bruce passed away. Since the gentleman who Mark, you learned from in junior high or whatever, knows Bat Jam Do, he should be a student of my teacher's teacher, Ip Man. Because Ip Man only taught Bat Jam Do and wooden dummy to the students he considered they are qualified to graduate from him. Ip Man also told his students not to teach Bat Jam Do and wooden dummy to their students that are not qualified. I mean, I'm reading verbatim what he sent me or whatever, because I was trying to ask him. I could have swear the middle name was like that. It wasn't the Hong Fei Hong, the very, very famous one. I'm a guy who has a paper trail in everything I do. There's too many people out there that fabricate stuff. I can prove anything and everything I've got, and I'm methodical how I do it. And in fact, when I'm even just thinking of my own stories, sometimes they seem hard to believe. And I have so many more details that I left out that are just incredible. And I'm supposed to write a book. And my teacher, Saito Sensei, said, within 2 years of your return, write a book. So I'm 20 years late or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And I've been writing forever, but it's just, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist as well. And I don't want to be one of these guys who's like, I'm going to go and write all these books. I want to write one. And he wants me to write one, not on the philosophy, not on the techniques, but on the process of training and learning.
Okay.
And it's kind of interesting because, and sharing some anecdotes of how he'd say, do this in threes or do this or that. Just little things that you can kind of apply to anything, I think. But yeah.
That's cool. Wow. Well, Mark, this has been so much fun. I've learned so much, and I truly, truly definitely want to come down and meet you in person and check out the dojo at some point next time I'm down in the Twin Cities area. But this has been so much fun, and I
always welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I seriously, I think the listeners are really going to enjoy this one.
Well, I appreciate you and everybody out there trying to keep this alive. I think we're in a time in the world where we need to get back to the basics and, that respect and honor and integrity and training the mind and body to be strong and try to contribute for the welfare of all, and give back, right? And this is a great way. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.
This podcast is a production of Unfiltered Studios. If you would like to know more about joining Unfiltered Studios, please visit our website at unfpod.com for more information.